This is question time for July 16th, and Steve Brennan is just right there, question in hand, ready to pass it on to Joe. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I've got a question about the Fed here. Joe, we've talked about this, but is the Federal Reserve behind the curve? Should they've already cut interest rates at this point in the cycle, looking at where we are?
Well, I think that I've said so, but I have a little evidence to support that case, put it that way. A lot of people do this kind of by the seat of their pants and say, well, things are slowing down and maybe the Fed should go ahead and cut. But there's an easier way to do that. And actually, I would say, too, that this bears on the whole issue of what the Fed calls forward guidance. The Federal Reserve, starting under Bernanke, started to use what they call forward guidance to shape market opinions about what they're going to do. The idea being that they don't want to do anything that surprises the market. Well, I actually have a problem with that. I think they should surprise the market sometimes. Maybe this market needs to be shocked a little bit sometimes. And maybe you get a bigger impact from their policy changes if they did that. But even if you assume that they shouldn't shock the market, that everybody should know what they're going to do, there's an easier way to do it than talking. Because that's what it consists of right now. It consists of getting, 10 Fed governors giving a speech every week, and some of them on different pages. So you never really get clear guidance because one guy says, oh, we should sit tight. Another one says we should cut. Another one says we should hike. How is that forward guidance? And by the way, forward guidance only works to the degree that they have the ability to predict what the economy is going to do, which they do not. So how do we do this without using open mouth policy rather than actually doing something that makes sense? So there's a thing called the Taylor rule. It's put forth by John Taylor, Stanford econ professor many years ago, a rules-based monetary policy. And if you had followed it all these years, you'd know that it's pretty darn good. So how about we take a look at the Taylor rule? And if you do that, what is the Taylor rule, first of all? Well, the Fed has a dual mandate, right? Keep unemployment low and keep inflation in control. So the dual mandate dictates that you have to do policy around those two mandates. Okay, so what does the Taylor rule do? The Taylor rule looks at inflation, it looks at unemployment, and it looks at the current Fed funds rate and so forth, and it looks at what's called NAIRU, which is a concept called the non-accelerating inflation unemployment rate or rate of unemployment. NAIRU, kind of a nebulous concept, but whatever. It takes all those things, puts them in a formula, which I'm not going to show you the formula. There's no reason to actually go through that. And it comes out and spits out a number and says, this is what interest rates, so this is what the Fed funds rate should be. This is where the Fed should have policy. Well, until recently, when they were holding policy steady at 5.25 to 5.5, that was actually right in line with the Taylor rule. Now, look, they were way behind the curve at the beginning. When inflation started to perk up, they did not hike rates nearly fast enough. They waited way too long to get started, and then they had to go very, very fast. Where if they had started sooner, they probably wouldn't have had to go as high, and they wouldn't have had to go as fast. And they were behind the curve, behind the Taylor rule the entire time until they got to the peak. So they got to 5.25, 5.5, and I was at 6, 7, 8 months ago, whatever it was, and they stopped, and that was in line. But starting a couple of months ago, about 3 months ago, actually, the Taylor rule started to say you need to cut rates. And if you look at the Taylor rule today, it dictates a rate on the Fed funds of about 4.6%. And we're at 5.25 to 5.5. So where should the policy be? If you're going to keep up with this idea of having a range, a quarter-point range, it needs to be 4.5 to 4.75, which means we're still behind the curve. And even if they cut in September, you're going to be behind the curve. They ought to be cutting in July. And my guess is that by the time they get to September, they're going to be cutting them a lot more rapidly than anybody thinks right now. But I don't know that for sure. We'll see. But the bottom line is that if you did that, if you had a Taylor rule, everybody can calculate the thing. Everybody would know that the expected rate right now, what the Fed's going to do, the expected rate is 4.6. The Fed's at 5.25. You know they're going to cut. There's no need to have forward guidance. There's no need for everybody to go out and give a speech on a daily basis. Everybody knows what to expect. So I don't know what it takes to get that done. Obviously, they're human and they like the discretion. They like to have this power of over the economy and over people's views of the economy, I suppose. I don't know. Everybody's got an ego, I suppose, but Anyway, my point is that yes, the Fed is behind the curve, and I think they should be cutting already. They should have cut already, and I think they should cut in July. I don't expect that to happen. And the longer they wait, the further behind they'll get. It's no different than when they were too late raising rates. If they get too late cutting rates, they'll be behind the curve until they catch up, and they'll have to cut very rapidly to catch up. And history says that's exactly what they do. Go back and look at previous times when they've been in a rate cutting cycle, and they don't cut once, and they end up cutting multiple times, usually in larger chunks than a quarter point, because they don't have any choice. They have to cut rates fast to get things down. And obviously there's a lag between the change in the policy rate and the effect on the economy. Like I said, the longer they wait, the further they get behind, the more likely a recession is. So we monitor this. We know what the Taylor rule says it should be, and we always monitor the gap, and there's almost always a gap. So we know that they're behind, but there's nothing we can do about it. We have to live with the world we have, not the one we want. So the answer to your question, Steve, is yes, they are behind the curve.
If you have questions for Joe, be sure you put them in the comment section down below.